All right, so here's the problem with the conversation. Here's the problem with the conversation on CRT, right? And all this CRT talk. I went to broadcasting school and learned how to repair broadcasting equipment. So my brain clicks when people say CRT. The first thing I think of is cathode ray tubes. I'm like, oh shit, are we starting a fandom movement of old school televisions? We're going to play some fighting games with no latency? Let's fucking go. Cathode ray tubes are the shit. Right? That's what I think when I hear CRT. Unfortunately, we're not talking about cathode ray tubes. We are actually talking about critical race theory. So the biggest problem with the current discourse on it, and if you're engaging with someone talking about CRT and going off on one of the rants, the very first thing you need to do is deconstruct their framing of the argument, their framing of the subject. What we need to do whenever you hear somebody going off about CRT, going off about critical race theory, is you need to deconstruct the framework they're operating from, because most likely they're operating from a lie. They're saying, oh, critical race theory is being pushed in our grade schools, it's being pushed in educational institutions, da, 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 da. Critical race theory is a legal theory. It's a legal framing, right? To describe these sorts of phrases as thought-terminating cliche. Yeah. Right. So the issue is, this is a legal theory. This is a legal subject. This is not being taught outside of law school. And it's not being implemented after being distilled from its study in an academic law environment. It's being distilled from that into programs designed to address systemic bias and then being disseminated to federal institutions staffed by educated adults, right? It's not it's not a curricular program. It's not a curriculum. It hasn't been, it is older than people think it is, but it hasn't been pushed on young students or anything like that. They're operating off of a lie. And the CRT is just their new boogeyman. This is why I make sure to always remind your gullible centrists, or even maybe some leftists, who say that, oh, the phrasing matters, the words you use matter. Oh, maybe Black Lives Matter isn't a good phrase. It doesn't fucking matter what phrase. We use a term or a phrase as clinical as critical race theory, which is not an offensive phrase, but they demonized it anyway. They make it into this racial justice boogeyman. Right now, I'm watching politicians on the TV screen talk about how they're literally preaching a hate of one's own whiteness through CRT. What? And I assure you, none of these people have read a critical race theory document. They're preaching a hate of the United States. And I'm going to make a point about that here in a second, why that's also not true. Despite it pointing out the flaws of the founding and the present day of the United States, it is not preaching hate in the United States, right? So they're operating off of lies. In the UK, the whole Brexit nonsense was built off of fucking lies. All the Brexit shit, lies. They drove around the country with a bus with a lie printed on the side of it. And CRT right now is this lie that they plastered across a banner. It's this exaggerated evil that they are crusading around, that they have to create as a villain to turn around and fight. Because Republicans and conservatives need their base to be scared. Conservatives don't function unless there is fear in their ranks. Leftists work off of hope and a desire to push for systemic change. We work off of a dream for the future. Conservatives work off of an idyllic and idealized past and a fear of the future. They have to have a fearful demon to turn their mobs against, because that's how you keep the people from looking up at the systems that are actually kicking them down. You have to have that demon, that monster, that bad guy. That bad guy can be Antifa, that bad guy can be BLM, that bad guy can be spooky, scary socialists, that bad guy can be universal health care, or that bad guy can be critical race theory. Even if none of this makes sense, they will find a way to demonize it. That's why I say the phrasing doesn't matter. It does not matter what we call things on the left. They will demonize it regardless. We literally have people who perform anti-fascist action, and we call that act Antifa. Nobody should be against anti-fascist action, and yet they are demonized every night on the news. The fact of the matter is, they're operating off of a lie, first and foremost. Critical race theory is a legal framework. It's something discussed among legal academia. All right, this involves historians, economists, lawyers, and researchers who actually do the diligence and the footwork, do the due diligence and the research footwork to actually understand the effects of systemic racism, past, present, and future, and then what we can do to address things like biases, what we can do to address things like the effects of redlining, what we can do to address things like restrictive covenants, what we can do to address things like biases in policing. That's all it is. It's trying to make a more egalitarian and more equitable world for everybody. It is not racially motivated, okay? It's motivated by equality, and it should be nonpartisan. But the problem is, conservative parties have now aligned themselves according to their relationship with the plight of minorities and marginalized people. You would think rights for trans people, same-sex couples to adopt, things like that would not be a partisan issue. It would be an issue discussing the freedom of people who live here. But they've made it a partisan issue because the partisan groups oppose the existence of those people, just as they oppose the empowerment of black communities in the United States. Yep, they use every scare tactic they can. They've turned socialism into a scare word. They've turned BLM into a scare word. They've turned Antifa into a scare word. And yet here's the thing, all the while, they're somehow trying to make the word nationalism friendlier. They're trying to defang nationalism, but make socialism sound so scary. And that's because they don't want people to be afraid of the term nationalism, because that's what they're fucking doing. They are nationalists. So many of them are white nationalists. And they don't want people to be scared of nationalism. They want them to be scared of socialism. Right? They want them to be scared of empowered black people. They want them to be scared of anti-fascist actors.